Hello and welcome to World News Tonight, live from Warsaw. My name is Ashim Kumar. It's necessary for Europe to build its own independence, says European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen at the World Economic Forum in Davos, as European leaders hesitate over joining Donald Trump's Board of Peace. But before we get there, let's take a look at some of the day's other top stories. Vladimir Zelensky cancels a Davos visit after another Russian air attack. Trade war looms over the transatlantic alliance. Dollar and US stocks down in reaction to Trump's foreign policy actions. Europe pushes back against US pressure at the World Economic Forum in Davos. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen signalled a shift towards permanent European independence and, alongside French President Emmanuel Macron, criticised President Trump's tariff threats over Greenland. We're now joined live from Davos by our correspondent Kazimierz Wyszak. Good evening, Kazimierz. How serious is this growing feud between the US and Europe?
Good evening, Ashim. US President Donald Trump hasn't yet arrived to Davos, but in a sense, he's very much here, as his latest threats towards Europe over Greenland are now making everyone question the transatlantic unity. And Europe seems to finally be fed up with these latest threats. President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, had a speech here earlier today, and by the standards of the European Union, which is usually quite diplomatic, you could say that she came out swinging. She called these tariffs a mistake and said that the future of the European Union and Europe is to be more independent.
Seismic change we are going through today is an opportunity, in fact, a necessity, to build a new form of European independence. If this change is permanent, then Europe must change permanently too.
And she wasn't alone in these comments, the criticisms towards Donald Trump. She was joined by French President Emmanuel Macron. Earlier in the week, Donald Trump revealed private text messages from Macron in which he asked what Donald Trump was doing with this insistence on Greenland. President Macron also had a speech here at Davos in which he indirectly called Donald Trump a bully.
We need more stability in this world, but we do prefer respect to bullies, we do prefer science to plotism, and we do prefer rule of law to brutality.
Kazimierz, could these threats from President Trump have consequences for NATO also?
Well, that's a very good point, Ashim. Indeed, the autonomous territory of Greenland is the territory of the Kingdom of Denmark. And Denmark is also a NATO member. The United States, being one of the most important founding fathers of NATO, is now threatening to take over Greenland, undermining the entire principle of the NATO alliance, which was founded to protect its own members. And now, unofficially in Europe, European leaders are already discussing a possibility of establishing another military alliance, possibly based on the coalition of the willing, given the fact that there is less and less trust in the United States. In fact, I posed that very question to the Romanian foreign minister who came here to the World Economic Forum. And even though Romania is very much supporting the idea of de-escalating this feud and of keeping NATO alliance together, she had to admit that the actions and words from Donald Trump are now putting NATO in question.
The idea that a territory needs to be owned by a country in order to be protected by that country or not to be challenged is valid only if NATO would be weak. As long as countries respect and reaffirm Article 5, then that in itself means that the territory of any of the allies is protected by all the allies.
President Donald Trump will be here on Wednesday and will be delivering the speech of his own. But he will not only talk about Greenland, there will be also plenty of other discussions with European allies, including about Trump's latest proposal of the so-called Board of Peace. And more on that and the reactions from Central Eastern Europe in this next report by my colleague, Paweł Trzaskowski.
Romania has already made a decision regarding its invitation to the Board of Peace. It has signed it with France and says no for now.
We're on board on continuing to work together on the peace process in the Gaza conflict. This is very important for us. In terms of the wider legal implications here, I think 3-4 days are not enough to assess that.
It's not an easy decision for a country which hosts substantial US forces on NATO's eastern flank. Warsaw, which finds itself in a similar predicament, will also have to make a call, but the Polish Prime Minister has hinted that the country's decision may be similar to Romania's.
Appeasement is always a sign of weakness. Europe cannot afford to be weak, neither against its enemies nor ally. Appeasement means no results, only humiliation. European assertiveness and self-confidence have become the need of the moment.
So far, the invite issued to Polish President Karol Nawrocki has been tentatively acknowledged by his office.
On the one hand, it's obviously a distinction for Poland that out of the 200 countries we have been invited. On the other hand, as we know, it carries certain risks. But I would look at the risks associated with the situation in the Middle East and suggest we approach this with cool heads.
There might be other concerns, though. Outside the Middle East, the Polish president would have to share a seat on the board with Russian and Belarusian leaders. And the membership, a clear sign of siding with Trump's vision of New World Order, could distance Poland from some of its European partners. Such a decision, however, requires bipartisan agreement between the president and government.
Poland participating in any kind of international organization or international deal requires consent from the Council of Ministers.
The government and the president are already holding consultations in regards to the invitation. It seems that no consultations were needed in Budapest, though. Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban accepted the invitation outright.
President Trump has invited Hungary to join the Board of Peace as a founding member. We have, of course, accepted this honorable invitation.
Orban proudly shared a letter from Trump in which the US president writes about the board that will be one of a kind. One of a kind is also the choice that Central and Eastern European countries are now presented with, to side with Trump or to stick with a united Europe. Paweł Trzaskowski for TVP World.
Donald Trump has invited 60 nations to his proposed Board of Peace, including Russia and China. Trump says the international body is designed to end wars and boost global stability. But how will it work? Michael von Blomstein takes a closer look at the organization's charter that world leaders are being asked to sign.
The Board of Peace. US President Donald Trump wants world leaders to sign the charter during the World Economic Forum in Davos. It was originally floated in November by the White House as a way to bring peace to Gaza. But the 7-page charter sent to 60 invited countries extends it to eventually include any international conflict. It aims to promote stability, lawful governance and enduring peace. Members are required to send heads of states or heads of government to represent them. No ministers, ambassadors or other envoys. And in order to keep their seats at the table after an initial 3 years, states have to pay $1 billion to make their membership permanent. While the Charter's mission resembles that of the United Nations, experts are skeptical on its chances to bypass the existing international organization.
It has very little legitimacy and no institutional foundation and no organizational history.
The Charter also sets out the structure of the Board of Peace. It resembles a corporation more than a traditional multilateral international organization. The Board of Peace is invitation only, with the invite sent out by the chairman. They are required to convene at least once a year to vote on agenda issues, which is a simple majority vote. That agenda is entirely set by the Executive Board, a committee of undetermined size or composition. It determines its own rules of procedure, in which the members have no say. They are eventually required to meet once a month. But at the very top is the chairman. That person decides who is invited and has full control over the appointing and firing of executive board members. The chairman has the power to veto all decisions. There is no term limit, and the chairman designates his own successor. The chairman is Donald Trump.
On the other hand, we have a proposal here from the American government that basically puts things in Trump's hands and in the hands of his colleagues, and to have them in charge. That mode of governance is not likely to work at all.
So far, only a few invited world leaders have expressed enthusiasm to join Trump's Board of Peace. The vast majority, however, have so far only acknowledged that they have received an invitation. For TVP World, Michiel van Blommestein.
While leaders in Davos are locked in high-stakes negotiations with Donald Trump, Brussels prepares for a trade war. The EU is putting together a raft of measures to hit back with, as our Brussels correspondent Alex Cadier explains.
Well, the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen at Davos saying that Europe's response to this crisis would be unflinching. We know that although those tempers may be hotting up in Davos, the final decision on how to respond will be made here at the European Commission in Brussels. We know the Commission is preparing more than 90 billion euros worth of retaliatory tariffs. They were already prepared the last time Donald Trump threatened a trade war with Europe before that deal signed at his golf course in Scotland. Now, the European Commission President, of course, saying very clearly she wants to avoid this trade war.
And this is why the proposed additional tariffs are a mistake, especially between long-standing allies. The European Union and the United States have agreed to a trade deal last July. And in politics, as in business, a deal is a deal. And when friends shake hands, it must mean something.
Retaliatory tariffs are one option. Then the broader anti-coercion instrument known as the trade bazooka from the European Commission could also be used. That would be a collective response from all European countries if negotiations with the United States fail. That clearly will be a concern of an all-out trade war between these two economic superpowers. But what of another economic superpower, China? What role might it play in this situation for Europe? On that, we heard from the French president.
Convergence and cooperation through multilateral frameworks. China is welcome, but what we need is more Chinese foreign direct investment in Europe, in some key sectors to contribute to our growth, to transfer some technologies, and not just to export towards Europe.
So Europe may be forced to get closer to China if the US becomes a less reliable partner. Another factor, of course, is that so many US assets are held right here in Europe, around $8 trillion worth, according to Deutsche Bank. Those could be just sold off if they want to really damage the US dollar. The only issue with that is most of these assets are held on the private sector and therefore would not be so easily sold. Nevertheless, the consequences of this decision, if there is a tit-for-tat between the European Union and the United States on trade, would be very damaging for both sides, hence why the leaders are in crunch talks in Davos. In Brussels, I'm Alex Cadier for TVP World.
Trump's tariff threats over Greenland have rattled global financial markets, causing US and European stocks to trend downwards. Meanwhile, gold and silver, traditional safe havens during geopolitical uncertainty, continue to rally. Trump's upcoming Davos speech and US Supreme Court decisions on tariffs and Fed independence could add further volatility to the financial markets.
U.S. President Donald Trump's latest tariff threats over Greenland are shaking up global financial markets, dragging down risky assets like stocks while lifting safe haven precious metals.
That's why we see the consequences in the form of the increase of the prices of gold and silver, and the decrease of prices of equity and other more risky instruments.
The U.S. stock market, which was closed on Monday for a federal holiday, tumbled at the start of Tuesday's session. The S&P 500, an index of the 500 largest publicly traded U.S. companies by market cap, was down more than 1% as of noon in New York, with European stocks also trading lower. In the foreign exchange market, the U.S. dollar weakened against a basket of currencies including the euro, yen, British pound, and Swiss franc. However, global tensions were welcome news for another group of investors, gold and silver bulls. The epic rally, which drove gold and silver prices to record highs last year, shows no signs of letting up, driven by geopolitical tensions, interest rate cuts by central banks, and the latter's ramped-up purchases of gold.
The central banks are very large institutional investors. So if other investors, private investors, the corporates see that central banks are active player on this market, that also stimulates the further increase of prices of gold.
But silver's rise has been more meteoric, with prices up 30% since the start of 2026 alone to just shy of $100 an ounce. Comparatively, that's up from less than $30 an ounce at the start of last year. Investors will have plenty to watch for in the coming days, including Donald Trump's speech at the World Economic Forum Summit in Davos on Wednesday. And in the U.S., the Supreme Court could soon rule on the legality of Trump's tariffs and the president's influence over the Federal Reserve, decisions that could have profound implications for the global economy and its financial markets.
It's undeniable that the decision that they make will not just affect our economy, that it will spill over into the rest of the world due to the central importance of the Fed and just the management of the global financial system.
Just when the trade war seemed to be over, investors are grappling with uncertainty again. Maciej Wilowski for TVP World.
As world leaders gather in Davos, one notable figure will be missing. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has cancelled his trip following another large-scale Russian attack. Our correspondent in Kiev, Oz Kataji, has the latest. Oz, what details can you share about Zelensky's decision?
Well, speaking to reporters, the Ukrainian president addressed this, saying if he had to choose between helping his people deal with this energy crisis and going to Davos, he chose the Ukrainian people. It's very clear that what's happening at the moment is a major emergency for Ukraine, a state of emergency declared by the Ukrainian government. And we're talking quite a serious attack as well, with nuclear power plant substations targeted. Chernobyl was disconnected from electricity for a period. We understand now that that power has been restored by Ukrainian crews trying to repair the damage. But, these attacks risk a potential nuclear meltdown in Ukraine's nuclear power plants. We have temperatures plunging below -10, -14 earlier in the day, and people are without power, without heating, central heating, without running water. 60% of Kiev's residents were left without power after another attack. Russia launched 339 drones, 18 ballistic missiles, 15 cruise missiles, and 1 hypersonic missile. 1 person was killed in the Kiev region from that attack. And once again, Ukrainian authorities saying Russia targeted Ukraine's energy infrastructure. This is a deliberate pattern over the course of Ukraine's coldest winter in decades to make life very difficult for Ukrainian civilians. The Ukrainian government is responding by trying to fix these substations, this electric grid, and try and restore it to full power. They've also set up these tents around the city, around cities across Ukraine, trying to provide warmth and shelter for Ukrainians who can't heat their homes, which is lots of Ukrainians. Even the Ukrainian parliament building today left without power, without heating, without water, and that's the Ukrainian parliament. So if even the seat of power in this country doesn't have electricity, then you can understand how difficult it's going to be for people living in rural communities, for people living closer to frontline areas. This is a real emergency situation. Russia has deliberately targeted systematically Ukraine's energy infrastructure over the course of many weeks in this recent spate of attacks, and the situation has reached a critical point for Ukrainians. So it's easy to understand why Zelensky has chosen to stay home. What's harder to understand is what Ukraine can really do about this situation. While they can repair these facilities and bring them back online, Russia is continuing to target them through the winter months. Zelensky, in his morning statement, thanking his allies for sending air defense missiles because Ukraine was running critically low on those too. So Russia, again, exploiting the defense deficiencies that Ukraine has to launch these attacks and to make life very difficult for Ukrainian civilians, Hashim.
Sounds absolutely horrible, Oz. Thank you for that report and stay safe. Following Australia's lead, Polish authorities are weighing a social media ban for children under 15. Opinions are split, even within the government. The Minister of Education supports the move, while the Minister of Digital Affairs remains cautious. Aisha Abachi reports.
If Australians did it, maybe we should too.
We follow Australia's example. That means we expect big tech companies not to allow children access to harmful content that is available on their platforms, essentially any content, unless they choose to verify it.
Authorities in Warsaw are now the next government contemplating effectively ending scroll culture for Poland's younger citizens. The centrist ruling coalition is expected to draft a bill by the end of February restricting the use of social media by children under 15.
As a father, I think this ban is the right thing to do. Children should have access to specific content, not just any content. I think up to 18, not even up to 15.
But while the Minister of Education has embraced the idea, Poland's Minister of Digital Affairs, Krzysztof Gawkowski, remains far more cautious.
We should be talking with parents about why they're setting up social media accounts for their children aged 9 or 10 when it's legal from age 13 up, instead of simply choosing, in a rather populist manner, to raise that age from 13 to 15.
The minister also added during an interview on Monday that bans raise the question of who would be punished for breaking the law. But if Poland really follows in Australia's footsteps, tech companies, not parents and teens, would be facing repercussions for any breaches.
Freedom is a top value for all people in Europe. There should be freedom. As soon as you try to limit that, that's going wrong.
But why is it the common belief that social media is harmful to young kids?
The primary issue is how quickly the brain receives pleasure while scrolling, and how difficult it then becomes to find satisfaction in everyday activities.
A recent report by NASK, Poland's research and academic computer network, found that as many as 40% of Polish children receive a smartphone before their 9th birthday, and they spend an average of nearly 5 hours a day online.
I don't think if you're too young, it wouldn't be an attack to your freedom. You have better stuff to do than being on social media.
But research and now government policy point to the same conclusion. Social media poses serious risks to developing brains. For TVP World, I'm Aisha Badja.
And now back to our main topic of the day. At the World Economic Forum in Davos, Europe is asserting its independence amid rising tensions with the United States. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen and French President Emmanuel Macron pushed back against President Trump's Greenland tariff threats. This as Trump proposes a board of peace aimed at ending conflicts globally, but instead dividing Central and Eastern Europe. To lay things out for us, we're joined by Philippe Dickinson, a Deputy Director at the Atlantic Council. Mr. Dickinson, welcome to TDP World. Thanks for taking the time.
Thank you very much.
So, talk to us about President Trump's Board of Peace. Where does it get its authority from, and what is its agenda?
Well, the Board of Peace was first proposed by the United States to the UN Security Council in November, and the UN Security Council approved the Board of Peace in a 13-0 vote. Russia and China abstained on that vote. But the way the Board of Peace was framed at that time was very much about the next stage in the peace negotiations around Gaza. It was around creating a medium-term solution to governance issues in Gaza, and it was very much focused around that problem. But what we've seen over the last few days from the reports is that the White House's vision for the Board of Peace is much more expansive, and that it will be granting a great deal of authority to the chairman of the Board of Peace, which is the president, Donald Trump. Your colleagues, your program explained some of the practical details and proposals that the United States has very well. So I won't repeat all of those here, but needless to say that the vision that is emerging for what this Board of Peace would represent is a lot more expansive than what the UN Security Council agreed to in November, and in some ways amounts to an attempt to supplant the UN as the premier forum for negotiating and hashing out peace deals and negotiations globally.
Understood. Now, supplanting the UN is something I want to come back to in just a second, but where does it get the authority from to make these decisions and therefore to enforce whatever decisions the Board of Peace comes up with?
Well, that's, I think, unclear and as yet to be determined, because the authority for the establishment of this comes from that UN Security Council resolution. But beyond that, the question of authority is very unclear and uncertain. There would presumably need to be some sort of treaty that is signed and agreed by the countries that decide to participate. But what legal authority goes beyond that is unclear. And as we mentioned, there would need to be engagement and support of other international mechanisms to grant it that universal and widely accepted credibility and acceptance. And it's unclear as to how this current version of what is envisaged would achieve that.
Another area where there is a lack of clarity, Mr. Dickinson, is amongst the Central and Eastern European nations. Hungary has leapt at the opportunity to be a member of the Board of Peace, whereas Poland is hesitating. It's in conducting a balancing act at the moment. How do you see that dynamic?
Yeah, I don't think it's hugely surprising that Hungary would leap at the chance to do this, to join this, because the Hungarian government and Viktor Orban personally sees a lot of close kinship with Donald Trump, and so wants to obviously curry favor and remain in the administration's good books. It's very understandable, though, that others, including Poland and others around Europe, should be in a wait-and-see mode and see to what extent this initiative and this proposal gains legs. I think that behind closed doors, there will be a lot of coordination between different governments and senior officials across European capitals as to exactly how to respond to and deal with this proposed vision of the Board of Peace, because it goes so much further than what was initially presented to the United Nations in November. So watch and see, I think, will be the approach for the Europeans. And unless what the Board of Peace will focus on and work on, unless that is tightened significantly, I think they will be hoping to just wait it out and hope that the idea just kind of loses momentum.
Right, well, we shall see if that happens. Now, moving on, another tool that, and this is connected with the Board of Peace, but it's also being used by President Trump to strong-arm countries into supporting his stance on Greenland. Ursula von der Leyen, in a speech at Davos, has said, look, a promise is a promise, and it should mean something. She says tariffs had been agreed upon. Prime Minister Tusk of Poland is saying appeasement never works. What should the EU be doing in this position?
I think it's important for the EU and all countries that are affected by this situation and the tariff threat, which does include some non-EU countries, should remain united, consistent, clear in their messaging to the Trump administration, whilst looking to find the off-ramp. The tariff threat is one that we've seen the president resort to a number of times. It is something that he feels very comfortable wielding. It is something that I think he thinks delivers results. Whilst in the background you have cabinet members in his administration, the likes of Scott Bessent or Steve Witkoff, etc., sort of trying to massage the president's tone a little bit and reassure that there is an off-ramp available there. So I think the focus for Europe should be on being clear on how it would respond should this escalate continue, what the steps in that escalation pathway look like, but most importantly, staying calm, staying united, and staying focused on how to get off that escalatory pathway.
Understood. Now, in terms of, if we zoom out and look at President Trump's general foreign policy, he seems to be withdrawing from a number of international bodies, including, it would seem at this stage, his interest in NATO declining. Do you see a NATO without America?
I personally don't think it is helpful to be giving voice and oxygen to the proposal or suggestion that the United States could be abandoning NATO. We went through this a lot in the first Trump administration, and this topic, this issue kind of comes up again in cyclical fashion. The way NATO allies handled 2025 with the Trump administration, the way the Secretary General handled the Trump administration last year was very successful. I know that it was distasteful to a lot of Europeans, but ultimately it was successful. And I think it's most important to get the conversation focused back on how to work together with the United States to strengthen NATO, rather than continuing to add to the sense that NATO is in some sort of kind of existential crisis. This is exactly what Russia wants, and we should always be thinking, I think, do what your enemy wants you to do the least. And for NATO, that is remaining calm and united and focused. And staying resolute in the face of, the way the president operates is to win the daily news cycle and to win it every day, just to focus on how you can move beyond this current news cycle, reassure the administration that you are taking their concerns seriously, but standing firm behind your red lines, and proposing how you can strengthen NATO, because the United States is absolutely essential to the success of NATO.
Good advice indeed. Mr. Philip Dickinson, thank you very much indeed for laying all that out for our audience. Have a good evening.
Thank you. Same to you.
Thank you. Bye-bye. And that brings us to the end of this episode of World News Tonight. Don't go away, lots more coming up. Goodbye.